testing your work. After you've worked on an issue, you may be tempted to just jump on to the next thing, but it's very important to test the issue that you're working on. Testing can mean different things. Let's say you're working on something physical, that you had an issue with your knee. You're sitting there doing work on yourself and you've tapped it down to what you think is like a 1 or a 2. It was an 8 and you're pretty happy and you're like, hey, it's so much better. In terms of a physical thing, in order to test it, you could get up and move around or just become aware of it. Testing could be as simple as that. Don't hurt yourself and only do whatever is within your limits without damaging your body in any way. Test it. Stand up on it. Move around on it. Make sure that it's clear. You can also imagine doing different activities. As you walk your way through it in your mind, notice if it flares up again. By doing this, you're testing the different aspects of it. It might be fine in certain circumstances, like sitting, but what about when you're lying down? Or maybe it's when you're walking or moving sideways. Try whatever you need to do to test it. The same goes for emotional issues. If it's a fear or phobia, you might want to vividly imagine as many scenarios as you can that would normally trigger you to have the fear. If you're afraid of spiders, imagine a scene where there's a spider and you see it. Okay, maybe you can even imagine that you're holding it. Now imagine it moving. Imagine that there are 3 spiders. Maybe that lights up something that you hadn't even considered. Imagine that you see it out of the corner of your eye. See if you can come up with some different scenarios so that you can test yourself to make sure that you're fully cleared on the issue. As you imagine those scenarios, then you can clear anything that's still remaining. That's one way to do it. Another is to run through a memory completely. So if you're working on a memory, run through that memory and see if you can make it more intense, like have brighter lights, louder yelling, more crying, or whatever intensity there is. If you feel like you've already cleared it completely, be sure to go back and try to make it more intense and notice if there's anything at all about it that bothers you. With some of these, try saying it out loud, especially if you're talking about a memory or an experience. Imagine that you're telling somebody about it. Some people also recommend trying to imagine that memory as though you were looking at it from a different perspective. Depending on how you've been looking at that memory, try to do it from a third-person perspective if you've been looking out of your own eyes as first person. Try to see the scene with yourself and the other person. Or you can imagine that you're first person if you've been seeing the scene from third person. When you switch perspective that way, you may notice that there are still some emotions in there that you can then clear with tapping. Another way to test something like a fear or phobia is to put yourself in a situation to actually experience it, without hurting yourself or putting yourself in danger. Obviously, this needs to be within reason. If you don't know how to swim, don't go jumping in a pool because you had a fear of water and you're over it. But you might go near a pool, or you might put your toes in to see if you're okay with it. If you have a fear of heights, go to the higher level of a building and look out the window to see if there's anything left. You don't need to jump off a cliff or go skydiving or go to the top of a mountain to check to see if you're over your fear of heights. You can test a belief or mindset. I use this all the time in my practice. Just say the statement out loud, and when you've already rated how true it is for you, then you can go back after you've tapped on it and test it to still see if it feels true. For example, if you had a limiting belief of, I am stupid, how true did that feel when you started? Let's say you've broken it down into all the aspects and memories and have cleared that belief down to a 1 or a 0. So then you try to retest it by saying it aloud again. As you say it out loud, see if it has any remaining intensity. And you can also try to say the opposite statement to see if that's untrue. In this case, you'd say, I am not stupid, or whatever the opposite is for you, I am really intelligent, or I'm pretty smart. Any statement that feels like the opposite will give you an opportunity to test. You can try and say it in different ways or with more emphasis. As you state the beliefs or the opposite of the beliefs from different angles, if there's any intensity or disbelief in there, then you know there's a little more to clear. It's wonderful information. That's what I mean by getting it to a 0. Testing and getting in there and pushing around to make sure that it's clear all the way. As you get into the practice of testing, you'll get better at clearing things all the way down, and it will be less likely for you to have to revisit an issue. That being said, some issues do have layers. You may clear something to a 0 at that time. It may come up again in a different context or at a later date, and you may wonder why it isn't still fully cleared. In this case, some core issues and beliefs have layers to them, and what might be presenting is just another layer or aspect to it that you hadn't considered, but you'll have a tool to clear out that part as well. The important part of this, however, is to remember to go back and check if these aspects are totally cleared or if they've just been skimmed over. It's about being thorough with the clearing and testing when you are finished.